Hello everyone, it is April. I am so excited, and I was hoping I'd be able to film this video outside in the garden, but we're at that point of the season where 2 days ago I was buying ice cream in a t-shirt and shorts, and this morning I had my winter jacket back on. So it is still a little brisky outside, but I'm gonna go over my task list for April. Now, like usual, I'll go over my specific task list that I'm gonna do, but since I'm growing everything in pots on a deck, there are some differences that I might do compared to what you might do if you do have a yard. So I'm gonna go over my list, then I'll go over the Chicago Botanic Garden's website. Again, I am in zone 6A, so if you're close to Chicago, we might be on similar timelines, or you might be a little bit behind or ahead of me. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, hopefully, admire my tulip flowers. I gave you an update a couple weeks ago on how my tulip bulbs are doing, and this is a big deal because I have killed them the last few years over winter. So far they're still alive, and since the update a few weeks ago, they are also still alive. So I'm hoping I'm gonna have a bunch of beautiful blooming tulips up here, and once they've actually flowered, and I know they've survived, I will put a whole video together about what I did differently this year that increased their rate of survival. Other than admiring my tulips, I will be continuing to start seeds indoors. So for April, I'll be doing my 4 to 6 week before last frost date seeds, starting them inside. I'm using like around Mother's Day, early to mid-May as my last frost date. So my 6-week seeds I will be starting this week, and then my 4-week seeds I'll be starting in 2 weeks. So 6 week I have status. I think I did post this on the community tab. I have status, I have feverfew, I'm forgetting what else I have, but that's a smaller group, I think. I think a lot of my seedlings are in the 4-week group, which is zinnias, I think all of my vegetables almost, except for cucumbers. I have my melons that I'm gonna start that I'm so excited about. So those quicker growing crops I'll be starting, and then that's it for inside. Anything else I will be direct sowing outside. But again, weather dependent, I probably won't direct sow any seeds outside until May, things like my sunflower seeds, but we'll see how that goes. If it does seem like it's consistently warming up enough before May, I might do some of those things in April, but usually if I want to be able to trust Mother Nature not to kill my plants, I will be direct sowing any of my warm season crops in May. Now, I have already direct sowed my cool season crops outside, so I have lettuce, I have radishes, I have cabbage, I have kale, carrots, and peas. I think that's everything I have out there right now. They are sprouting. Now, I have had issues in the past with my cool season spring crop because sometimes it stayed too cold and then jumped up to really high temperatures. I think, looking at the weather forecast, we will have a good spring season for them, but I won't be sowing another round of anything except for, I think, the radishes, because the radishes, days to maturity is like 30 days, so I can get a couple rounds, hopefully, before the temperatures start to increase. So those I will probably do a second round of. Everything else, I'm just sticking with what I've already sown. Now, with the seeds I start indoors, I will start hardening them off outside. So you don't want to just take your little baby seedlings that have been living inside in your nice warm home with barely any wind unless you have a fan, and then just kick them outside into the sun. You want to be able to slowly acclimate them to the outdoors. So once temperatures are like stable around 50 degrees, I will put them outside and then bring them back inside. I start with 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, slowly increasing. Not only increasing time, but increasing the amount of time they're in the sun. So I'll probably move them out first into my greenhouse where my perennials currently are. Again, giving them protection from the wind. It's also in a more shaded area. And then every day giving them a little bit more sun, moving them out of the greenhouse, just toughening them up so they don't immediately flop over and die when I move them to my garden. So again, when the days are above 50 degrees and up here on my rooftop decks, it is even warmer than that, or at least it feels warmer than that, so I might get away with a little bit of cooler temps, but I definitely keep an eye on my plants when I'm hardening them off. But I can't believe I'm starting that. That means we are really, really close to garden season being in full swing. Next on my list is starting to set up my herb garden. So I already have my stands out there that I just leave outside. I think, making a few changes in terms of pot size. I tell myself I'm gonna do fewer herbs in larger pots, and then I'll probably end up getting even more herbs than last year and using the same size pots. But for now, I've been using 8-inch terracotta. I really want to try to put some in 10, maybe 12 inches, especially the more vigorous growing plants like mint. But some of these herbs are ready to be planted outside and stay outside in April. So things like cilantro, mint, thyme, those you can put outside. What I would recommend if you're unsure, well, one, Google it, but two, go to your local garden center, and what they have outside, usually for the most part, are plants that can be planted by you outside during this time. Now, this next one is forcing my dahlias by getting them planted inside before I move them outside. You just saw me do that in a video with 4 of my dahlia tubers. I have more coming in the mail, so I will be doing that again this month once they arrive. And then I also have 12 pots of dahlias, well, grow bags and pots of dahlias in the garage that I overwintered from last season. I do not know where all these are going to go, but I'm sure I will find a spot for them. So either I will be planting up the new tubers that arrive and keeping them inside until after last frost, or I'll be waiting to see which ones in the garage sprout, because as the garage warms up, that'll trigger the dahlias to actually start sprouting for the season. The ones that do sprout, I will carry upstairs because I want to make sure they are alive before I carry them up to the rooftop deck. In the past, I have brought them up early and put them in the shower, but I, again, have ended up with more plants than last year, so I'm trying to save some space. So they're gonna stay in the garage until they sprout. I'll bring them up here, and then again, after last frost, early to mid-May, I will kick all of those outside. For the perennials that have been outside, so I keep some in the garage, some were just out on the decks as is, and some were in a plastic greenhouse on the deck. Any that show signs of life, I will prune and fertilize. I will do a whole specific video on how I fertilize my potted perennials each spring. I will link last year's down below, but I will also show you what I do this year. And then pruning, most of my plants are still pretty small, so I only take off branches that are broken or look diseased. Other than that, I don't have to do a lot of pruning, which is really nice. But again, I will take you along with me as I do that this season. But I don't want to bother with pruning or fertilizing until I know the plant is not dead. And sometimes with the spring rain that we get, I will have a plant where the buds start to swell and then they stop, and then the plant dies because of root rot from all of the rain. So I am gonna wait probably till the end of April just to be safe. But signs that your plant has survived, if it is starting to put out new shoots from the ground, or the buds on the stems are starting to swell, or you're actually seeing the color green coming out of it, that's a good sign. If you are impatient and want to see if a plant is alive or not, or if it's been a while into the season and you aren't seeing signs of growth, either just scratch a little bit of the bark off a stem and see if it's green inside or brown. Green is alive, brown's dead, but do a couple branches too, so you're not just happening to hit a dead branch versus other ones that are alive. And then also you can just cut a stem and see if it's green inside. But I don't want to waste any of my fertilizer on plants that are dead. I will say though, I am learning what can stay outside versus inside. For example, I know that I need to cover my tulips. I know that I need to cover my peonies so they don't get too wet. I know that my raspberries can stay outside uncovered. So I have been learning that. And then once I figure out everything that has lived this year, I will once again go over how I stored them. But I do think I have a video from last season where I showed where I put everything, so I will also link that down below. I will be continuing with garden cleanup. Now, I used to be a person that wanted to get everything cleaned up in fall, and then I realized the benefits to insects and other wildlife to leaving your plant material in the garden. So until the temperatures are again consistently above 50 degrees, which hopefully by mid to late April they will be, that's when, if any insects were living inside of the branches, they've left. I will then clean up everything. Now, if I do have to use a bed, so for example, where I have my tulips planted, those I did have to plant in fall, so I did do cleanup in those beds. But I think everything on my front deck, is that true? Almost everything on my front deck I have just left from last season. So we'll do a cleanup of everything in the garden. I will refresh the soil in those beds. Again, I will link last year's video down below and also take you along with me again this year. But I'm finding that the lazier I am in the garden, the better things do, which is great for me, a person who does love to be lazy at times. So leaving plants in the garden, not raking up your leaves. I love that that is actually beneficial for the garden. Next is something I'm very excited about, even though I'm very excited about everything, but planting first plants on my garage deck. So this is going to be the first year now that the garage deck is done and I'm actually growing things on it. We've been here since 2020. It was a rotting wooden deck when we moved in, so we never used it. Like, we barely ever sat out there or did anything. But now we got it completely redone, all of the leaks fixed that they find when they start doing all of the repair work. And I'm pretty sure, all of my pots out there. Now, what I think I'll be planting up this month, because you can start planting some perennials and shrubs in April when it's still a little bit cooler. I think I'm going to plant up my mini orchard. So that'll be exciting. And I might plant up the border, but that depends on the timing of some plants that I've ordered online and when they actually arrive. But I have all the trees for my orchard, so that I'm going to get planted up. And I'm so excited for this, but I do have to restrain myself so that that deck doesn't just turn into a full garden and we actually have space to sit and eat there as well. And then lastly on my list is to check my hose spigots and my irrigation. I have had issues before with my hose spigots leaking water out of the top. I don't know all the names of all of the pieces, but I do know that I need to replace a certain piece if that's happening again. So I want to check that before I need to desperately water my plants or have my irrigation running. Now, up on these two decks, my irrigation is basically set up because I've had it now for the last few years. The garage deck, I will be setting up all new irrigation, but I have to get that planted up first. So we're going to wait for that to happen before I actually set up the irrigation and figure out where all the pots are going to go. But I might do some repair work. So I will test my irrigation, see how it's running, see if there's any pieces that are missing, if there's any leaks that I need to repair, and get that all ready for the season. So that is my list. Now we will go into the Chicago Botanic Gardens list, because again, they might have some tasks that I just don't need to do in my garden. So first on their April garden to-do list, and I'll link this list down below, they have one for every month. So if you're in the area, it's a fantastic resource to reference. But first is continue to remove garden debris left over from last year. It says to compost stems, buds, and leaves, but discard any diseased material. So I will be doing that with my containers. Amend soil with compost. I will also be doing that with my containers. Mulch for garden borders and lawns. I don't do like regular wood chip moss. One, because it is heavier than the bags of soil I carry up here. And two, because my containers are so small, well, compared to growing in a yard, and my plants are so close together, they basically cover all of the soil anyway. But I do use like chopped up pieces of plants sometimes as mulch. Some planting can begin. Trees, shrubs, and perennials can be planted in April, as well as some varieties of vegetables, herbs, and annuals. And then it says, consider whether your spring garden is supporting pollinators. So quickly review what's blooming in your garden. Early spring can be a challenging time for bees, moths, and other pollinators. And you want to consider if you can add earlier blooming bulbs. So this is something I am trying to do. I know I was so excited about my tulips, but I'm pretty sure I need to rewatch the video that I also planted some snowdrops and crocus bulbs, but those are so small, I don't think they survived. Like, I think they rotted in the beds, even though I didn't get them wet at all over winter. I think the freezing and thawing probably did them in, but again, I will wait until I know for sure what has survived and what hasn't to go into details over all of that. Plant cool season annuals. They can be planted in garden beds and containers. I don't do a ton of like buying pansies from the store or other cool season annuals, just because it's such a short time in my garden. I would rather spend the money on the plants that are going to be there throughout the warm season. I will pot up the plants on my front, or the pots on my front stoop, because that doesn't take up a lot of soil and I don't have to carry anything upstairs. But I don't do a ton of pansies or anything in the spring. Now in the fall, when things start to fade and I miss the full space, I do. But other than sowing cool season crops, trying to keep my bulbs alive, that's my main focus in the early spring. Next on the Chicago Botanic Gardens list is dividing perennials. Divide mature summer and fall blooming perennials as they emerge, ideally when they are 4 to 6 inches tall. This is something that is very different because I garden in containers. So I keep my plants undivided until they can no longer fit in the pot and they are overcrowded and need to be divided. For example, with my dahlia tubers, I don't divide those every year. When you're planting a dahlia tuber, you just need one tuber and an eye, and that can create a dahlia plant. But I don't have enough space to, let's say I doubled all of my dahlia tubers by cutting them in half. I don't have space to put double the amount of pots out here for my dahlias. So I'm kind of going the opposite direction of keep everything in one pot until it looks like it cannot stay in that pot anymore, and then divide it. And for the most part, any plants that I do divide get given away because, again, I don't have the space to have multiples of a lot of the plants that I love. Ooh, this is one that I do need to do that I need to add to my list. Support peonies. I actually have 3 peonies that have sprouted in 3 pots on my back deck garden. I planted them last spring. They got maybe, I don't know, like a few inches tall and had a little bit of leafing on them. I don't know if they'll flower this year. We'll see how big they get. But I left them out in the pot, planted annuals around them. They got a lot of water throughout the season. So I wasn't sure if the peonies were gonna rot. Like I've had issues with a lot of my plants rotting from excess water, but they're coming back. I'm keeping them covered when we have rain. So I'm hoping I have some beautiful pansies growing this year. But I do need to add supports. Again, depending on how tall they get. It recommends here when they reach about 10 inches, take a hoop and support it. I do have some 19-inch cages that I can use for that. They also have on their list 10 to spring flowering bulbs, fertilized spring flowering bulbs with a granular 5-10-5 or 10-10-10 mix as new green growth emerges. Now, I have not done this in past years because I've been so consistently killing the bulbs over winter. I, again, didn't want to waste fertilizer. I did add granular fertilizer at planting, but I probably should, in the containers where they are definitely coming back, I probably should add some this month. So I will also add that to my list. So supporting peonies and then fertilizing my spring bulbs. Trees and shrubs. This is, again, I have a few evergreens, but it's not like I have giant trees anywhere on my rooftop deck, but it says to plant trees and shrubs before they break bud and when the soil conditions permit. That is one thing I have to be careful of growing in containers because I use potting soil. And the potting soil, if it's been stored inside at the store when I buy it, I can dump it into a pot and it's workable and I can plant a tree. But that doesn't mean it's not going to freeze if we have drops in temperature after I've planted it. So I do have to be careful of that just because my potting soil, that again has been inside, is workable, does not mean I should actually be planting plants and putting them outside at that time. Also on their list, sow seeds outdoors. Talked about that already. Plant cool season crops, prune grapevines. I did have a grape plant once, but it also died of root rot. Lawn care, again, this is something I don't deal with. It says if weeds were a problem last year, spread a pre-emergent weed control over your lawn as weather and temperature permits, and then keep sowing seeds indoors. So that's everything on their list and my list. I need to remember to add the peonies and the bulb fertilizer, but it is happening. We are in the thick of garden season and I am very, very excited. I've been trying to lure the consistently warm temperatures to stay by wearing brighter colors every single day. I don't know if it's working yet, but I'm hoping that we get out of this like 30-degree weather soon and I don't have to see it again until hopefully next December, and we are consistently warming up into the season. So let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if there's anything else that you have on your task list, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.